The storm came in fast from the north the way they always did in January along the Alaskan coast. Knox Ashford watched it through the salt-stained window of the Anchor Point diner, his coffee growing cold between weathered hands. The sky had turned the color of old bruises, purple and gray, pressing down on Blackwater Cove like a fist closing around the throat of the world. The wind hit first, not the gentle push of autumn breezes, but the brutal shove of Arctic air that made the diner's walls groan and the windows rattle in their frames. Snow followed, thick flakes that stuck to everything they touched, building up on power lines and rooftops with methodical determination. Within minutes, visibility dropped to nothing. Inside the diner, the temperature rose as bodies packed together. Fishermen in Carhartt jackets, truckers stranded between routes, families with wide-eyed children pressed against fogged glass. The place smelled of coffee and wet wool, of French fries, and the particular musk of people who'd been working hard in the cold. Knox sat in the corner booth, the one that gave him a clear view of both exits, and kept his back to solid wall. Old habits. 14 years in the teams had carved those instincts into his bones deeper than any tattoo. He wore simple clothes, jeans, and a gray Henley under a canvas jacket, nothing that drew attention. His beard was trimmed short, more salt than pepper now at 38. The gray had accelerated in the last 8 months, since Celeste died. He pushed the thought away. Grief was a luxury. Grief made you slow, made you miss details, made you vulnerable. Right now, he needed to stay sharp. Under the table, Havoc shifted position. The German Shepherd was 6 years old, 73 pounds of trained lethality. With a temperament like Damascus steel, his coat was the traditional black and tan pattern, though the tan had darkened to almost gold in places. His eyes were amber, the color of whiskey in sunlight, and they tracked every movement in the diner with focused intensity. Knox reached down, let his fingers brush the dog's head. Havoc leaned into the touch for just a moment, then returned to his surveillance. They'd been through 3 tours together in Afghanistan, had bled on the same sand, had saved each other's lives more times than Knox could count. When the IED took out their convoy and shrapnel tore through Havoc's right side, the brass wanted to put him down. Knox had paid for the surgery himself, maxed out 2 credit cards. The dog recovered. The scars were still there, pale lines through the fur above his ribs, but Havoc moved like he always had. That was 2 years ago, back when Celeste was still alive, back when Knox still believed the world made sense. He knew better now. The diner door opened. Cold air rushed in, bringing with it 4 young people who moved with the careless arrogance of those who'd never faced real consequences. Knox cataloged them automatically. 2 men, 2 women, all in their mid-20s. Expensive clothes that looked ridiculous in a working-class diner. The one in front was tall, maybe 6'1", with the build of someone who'd played lacrosse at an East Coast prep school. His hair was styled with product that probably cost $50 a jar. He wore a silk shirt under a cashmere sweater, baby blue, that matched his eyes. Those eyes swept the diner with obvious disdain. His companions laughed at something he said. The girlfriend was blonde and beautiful in the way of people who'd had professional help. She held her phone up, filming everything. They took a booth near the center of the room. The tall one snapped his fingers at the nearest server, a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from working double shifts. Knox had seen her before, had been watching her for the past 3 weeks. Her name was Ember Hartley, 24 years old. She had a younger sister who'd gone missing 2 months ago. Knox knew better than to believe the police explanation of a runaway. Ember approached the table with the cautious wariness of prey that had learned to recognize predators. She had a bruise on her left wrist, fading to yellow-green, shaped like fingers. "What can I get you?" Ember's voice was professionally pleasant, but there was a tremor underneath. The tall one, whose name was Drake Wellington, looked her up and down with the kind of slow, deliberate appraisal that made it clear he considered her property to be examined. "Coffee," he said, "and try not to mess it up this time." This time, meaning he'd been here before. Ember's shoulders tensed. She nodded, turned toward the coffee station. The diner was packed. Ember had to navigate between tables, stepping carefully around chairs and bags. She was carrying a full pot of coffee when it happened. Drake Wellington stuck his foot out. Not far. Just enough. Ember's shin hit his polished leather shoe and her balance shifted. The coffee pot tipped and hot dark liquid splashed across Drake's baby blue cashmere sweater. The diner went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful moment, but the terrible silence of 50 people simultaneously deciding that someone else's problem wasn't worth getting involved in. Drake stood up slowly. His face had gone red, a flush that started at his collar and climbed to his hairline. "You stupid bitch," he said quietly. Ember backed up, hands raised. "I'm so sorry. It was an accident. Do you have any idea what this cost?" Drake's voice was rising now. "This sweater is Italian cashmere. You probably don't make in a year what I paid for this outfit." "I'm sorry," Ember said again. "Please, I'll pay for the cleaning." Drake grabbed her wrist, the bruised one. His fingers dug into the fading marks and Ember winced. He pulled her closer. "You'll pay," he laughed. "With what?" His girlfriend was filming now, phone held high. The other two companions laughed on cue. Ember tried to pull away. Drake held tighter, and then with his free hand he pushed her head down. Her face hit the table with a sound like a hammer striking meat. Solid, brutal, undeniable. Someone in the diner gasped. Most people looked away. Drake pulled her head up and slammed it down again. Blood appeared, a thin line from a cut above Ember's eyebrow. "Say you're sorry again," Drake demanded. "I'm sorry." Ember's voice was thick with tears and pain. "Please, I'm so sorry." He lifted her head a third time. Knox's coffee cup was halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, precisely. The porcelain made a small click against porcelain. Under the table, Havoc rose to his feet. The movement was fluid, controlled, but there was something in it that drew the eye. The dog's hackles were up, a low growl built in his chest, rising to a frequency that made people uncomfortable. Knox stood up. He didn't rush. He just unfolded from the booth with the kind of economy of movement that comes from years of moving quietly in dangerous places. His eyes were fixed on Drake Wellington. "Let her go," Knox said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of absolute certainty, the tone of a man who had given orders in places where disobedience meant death. Drake turned, still holding Ember's wrist. His eyes swept over Knox, taking in the worn jeans, the simple jacket. "This doesn't concern you, old man. Go back to your corner." Old man. Knox was 38. He took a step forward. Havoc moved with him, staying at heel but ready. The dog's amber eyes were locked on Drake with predator focus. "That's your last warning," Knox said quietly. "Let her go. Apologize. Walk away." Drake laughed. His friends joined in. The girlfriend kept filming. "Or what?" Drake pulled Ember closer. "You gonna do something about it?" Knox's expression didn't change. He closed the distance in 3 steps. His hand came up, caught Drake's wrist in a grip that looked casual but was anything but. He applied pressure to a specific point, the radial nerve cluster. Drake's fingers opened. He tried to pull away, but Knox was already moving, already rotating the arm up and back into a control position that put Drake on his toes, bent forward, completely helpless. "Navy SEAL?" Knox said conversationally. 14 years. I've forgotten more about hurting people than you'll ever learn. And this..." He increased the pressure slightly. Drake whimpered. "This is me being polite." The diner had gone completely silent. "Now," Knox continued, his voice still calm, "you're going to apologize to her. Then you're going to leave." Drake's face had gone white. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the diner door banged open. Sheriff Boone Haynes stood in the doorway like a mountain made of flesh and bad intentions. He was 55 years old, thick through the middle, with the weathered face of a man who'd spent decades making deals with the devil. His khaki uniform was crisp, his silver star polished. His hand rested on the butt of his service weapon. "Let him go," the sheriff said. Right now. Knox didn't move. His eyes met the sheriff's. This man just assaulted that young woman, Knox said. Multiple witnesses. I'm making a citizen's arrest. Sheriff Haynes didn't even glance at Ember, who was leaning against a table, blood trickling down her face. I see a man assaulting Mr. Wellington. If you don't let him go in the next 5 seconds, I'm taking you in. Knox measured the moment. 2 deputies had appeared behind the sheriff, both young, both nervous, both with hands on their weapons. The room was full of witnesses, but Knox could see it in their faces, the fear, the resignation, the desperate desire to not get involved. He released Drake's arm. The young man stumbled forward, caught himself, straightened his expensive clothes. The fear was already leaving his eyes, replaced by smug certainty. That's better, Sheriff Haynes said. Now, Mr. Wellington, are you pressing charges? Drake rubbed his wrist, his eyes on Knox. For a moment there was calculation there. Then he smiled. Not today, Sheriff. I think our friend here has learned his lesson. He turned to Knox. But you should know something. My father is Victor Wellington. He owns Wellington Financial. He owns half this county. He stepped closer, dropping his voice. And he definitely owns the sheriff. So whatever you think you're doing, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Knox said nothing. He just looked at Drake with the patient, measuring gaze of a man who'd hunted terrorists through the mountains of Afghanistan. Drake's smile wavered just for a second. Then he turned and walked out. Sheriff Haynes lingered. I don't know who you are, stranger, but get in your truck, get out of my town, and don't come back. What kind is that? Knox asked. The kind that thinks being a hero makes you special. The sheriff's eyes were hard. This is my town. We handle our own problems our own way. Knox nodded slowly. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. The sheriff studied him a moment longer, then left. The diner remained quiet for another few seconds. Then people returned to their meals, their determined effort to pretend nothing had happened. Knox moved to where Ember stood. She was pressing a napkin to her forehead, her hands shaking. You okay? He asked quietly. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. You should get that looked at, Knox said. Might need stitches. Can't afford the ER, Ember said. I'll manage. Knox wanted to say more, but he'd seen the sheriff's face. He knew how this worked. If you need help, I'm staying at the old warehouse on Marine Street, the brick one near the docks. Ember looked at him like he'd just offered her something dangerous. Why would you help me? Because someone should, Knox said simply. He turned and walked back to his booth. Havoc was already there, watching the door. Knox threw bills on the table, enough to cover his coffee and a generous tip. As he stood to leave, he noticed something. Ember's employee name tag had a small bump on the back. He'd seen bugs like that before. GPS trackers. Someone had been monitoring her movements, but Knox thought he already knew who. Outside, the storm had intensified. Snow fell in sheets. Knox and Havoc walked to his truck, an old Ford F-150. The engine turned over on the third try. Knox sat there for a moment, watching the diner through the falling snow. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. I know what you're doing. Stop now, or people will get hurt. He deleted the message and started driving. 20 minutes later, Knox stood in the warehouse he'd been using as a base, cold, drafty, filled with the smell of old fish and rust. But it had electricity, running water, and no lease that could be traced back to his real name. Havoc went through his usual sweep. When satisfied, he settled near the door. Knox opened his laptop and pulled up the files he'd been compiling for 3 weeks. Faces, names, connections. At the center was a photograph of Victor Wellington, owner of Wellington Financial, and the man responsible for his wife's death. Not directly. Victor was too smart for that. He'd just created a system designed to crush people slowly, to extract every penny and every bit of hope, until there was nothing left but despair. Celeste had needed experimental cancer treatment. Insurance wouldn't cover it. They'd been desperate. Someone recommended Wellington Financial. The paperwork had been deliberately complex. The interest rate seemed reasonable at first, 12%, but buried in subsection 7B was a clause that allowed Wellington to adjust rates based on market conditions. Within 3 months, their rate had jumped to 23%. The fees had been worse: origination fees, processing fees, late fees. They'd borrowed $50,000. Within a year, it was over $100,000 and the calls started. Collection calls 15 times a day. They called Celeste's hospital room. They told her she'd ruined their lives, that she should just give up. The stress had been worse than the cancer. Knox watched Celeste deteriorate faster than predicted. Watched the light go out of her eyes months before the disease finally took her body. She died on a Tuesday morning in April. Wellington Financial called that afternoon to discuss payment arrangements. Knox had sold everything, paid off the loan, all $147,000. Then he'd packed a duffel bag, loaded Havoc into his truck, and driven north to Alaska. He wasn't here for revenge. Revenge was emotional, sloppy. Knox was here for something colder. He was here to dismantle the Wellington empire piece by piece, to ensure that Victor Wellington and his son spent the rest of their lives in federal prison. He was here for justice. His phone rang. Unknown number. Knox answered without speaking. "Mr. Ashford." The voice was male, older, cultured. "I believe we should talk." "Who is this?" "Victor Wellington." "I think you know who I am, just as I know who you are. Former Navy SEAL, husband of Celeste Ashford, who sadly passed away 8 months ago. Currently living in an abandoned warehouse, conducting some kind of investigation into my business practices." Knox said nothing. "I'm calling to make you an offer," Victor continued. "Leave Blackwater Cove tonight. Never come back. In exchange, I'll personally ensure that all records of your wife's debt are expunged. I'll even throw in $50,000. Consider it compensation for your loss." "My wife is dead because of you," Knox said quietly. "Your wife died of cancer, Mr. Ashford. A terrible tragedy, but hardly my fault. The loan was a business transaction. The harassment, the calls to her hospital room, the threats, those were criminal." "Prove it," Victor said. "You'll find that documentation is scarce, memories are unreliable, and judges in this county are sympathetic to local businesses. You're tilting at windmills. You're going to lose." "Maybe," Knox said, "but I'm going to make you bleed first." Silence. When Victor spoke again, his voice had gone cold. "That was the wrong answer. I was trying to be generous, but since you've declined, let me be clear. If you continue this crusade, I will destroy you. Not metaphorically, literally. I will take everything you have left and grind it into dust." The line went dead. Knox set the phone down carefully. Havoc had lifted his head, sensing tension. Knox reached down, scratched behind the dog's ears. "Looks like we got their attention, boy." Havoc's tail wagged once. Knox returned to his laptop, pulling up a new file. He had 3 weeks of surveillance data. Drake Wellington wasn't just a spoiled rich kid. He was part of something bigger. 11 young women had gone missing in Blackwater Cove over the past 18 months, all between 16 and 24. All from working-class families, all dismissed by police as runaways. The last one was Willow Hartley, Ember's 16-year-old sister, who'd vanished 2 months ago. Knox had been tracking financial transactions. Every time a girl disappeared, there was a corresponding payment from a shell company to another shell company, amounts ranging from $20,000 to $50,000. The trail led back to Wellington Financial. Always. A knock at the warehouse door made Havoc's head snap around, low growl hackles rising. Knox's hand moved to the Glock at his back. "Mr. Ashford?" A woman's voice. "It's Ember Hartley, from the diner." Knox moved to the door, checked through the gap. Ember stood in the snow alone, shivering. He opened the door. She stepped inside quickly. "I'm sorry to bother you. I didn't know where else to go." "What happened?" "I need to show you something." Ember pulled off her employee name tag and held it out. "After you left, I kept thinking about how Drake always knows where I am. So I looked at this really closely." Knox took the badge, turned it over. There, embedded in the plastic backing, was a GPS tracker no bigger than a grain of rice. Professional grade. Someone's been following me, Ember said. For months, maybe longer. Knox nodded slowly. Who had access to this badge? That's what scared me. Ember met his eyes. Last month, Sheriff Haynes came into the diner, said he was doing a security check. He took mine, held it for maybe 5 minutes. When he gave it back, he smiled at me, like he knew something. The sheriff. That made sense. The Wellingtons had bought the law, and the law was helping them hunt. I need you to tell me everything, Knox said. They sat at the folding table. Havoc positioned himself between Ember and the door. She talked for 40 minutes, and Knox listened. Drake had been stalking her for 8 months, ever since she'd filed a complaint about him grabbing her in a parking lot. Nothing had come of it. Sheriff Haynes explained it was her word against Drake's. But after that, Drake started showing up everywhere. The harassment escalated. Threats whispered in parking lots, physical intimidation, then the incident with her sister. Willow disappeared 2 months ago, Ember said. She was working at the Quick Stop. Security camera shows her leaving at 10 p.m. She got in her car, drove away. That's it. She just vanished. What did the police say? Sheriff Haynes said she probably ran away, that teenagers do it all the time. Ember's hands clenched. But Willow wouldn't do that. She was taking care of our mother who has diabetes. She was working 2 jobs. She had plans. You don't think she ran away? I know she didn't. Tears in her eyes now. Because the day before she disappeared, Drake cornered her. Willow called me scared. She said Drake told her that her sister needed to learn some manners, and if I didn't start being nicer to him, there would be consequences. Knox felt something cold settle in his stomach. Did you tell the police? I tried. Sheriff Haynes said it was hearsay. He suggested maybe Willow ran away because she was scared, and that was my fault. Ember wiped her eyes. He made it sound like I was the problem. Your sister isn't the first to disappear, is she? Ember shook her head. 11 girls in 18 months. But nobody cares because they're girls like us. Working class. No powerful families. We're disposable. You're not disposable, Knox said quietly. And I'm going to find your sister. Why? Ember looked at him with hope and suspicion. Why would you help me? Knox thought about how to answer that. He could tell her about Celeste, about the debt and harassment. Could explain that he understood what it felt like to be crushed by people with power. Instead, he said simply, because someone should have helped my wife and no one did. The door burst open. Havoc was on his feet, instantly snarling. A woman stood in the doorway, older, maybe 52, with dark hair streaked with gray. She was breathing hard. Ember, the woman said. Thank God. I've been looking everywhere for you. Aunt Grace. Ember stood up. What's wrong? Grace Hartley stepped inside, closed the door. She looked at Knox with the evaluating gaze of a medical professional. Whatever she saw satisfied her. I have something you need to see. She pulled a USB drive from her coat pocket. I'm a nurse at Blackwater Medical Center. 6 months ago, I started noticing a pattern. She handed the drive to Knox. Young women coming into the ER with injuries. Assault, usually. The pattern was the victim's descriptions: tall man, mid-20s, expensive clothes. They were describing the same person, but when I checked the police reports, they either didn't exist or had been marked unfounded. Drake Wellington, Knox said. Grace nodded. I started keeping my own records. That drive has everything: medical records, photographs of injuries, patient statements. 12 women over 3 years. Knox plugged the drive into his laptop. Photographs of bruised faces, broken bones, medical reports detailing injuries consistent with assault, rape, attempted murder. Statements all describing the same perpetrator. Why didn't you go to the police? Knox asked. I tried, Grace said bitterly. Sheriff Haynes told me I was making serious accusations that I needed more than coincidence. When I pressed, he suggested I focus on my job. The next day, I got a written warning for inappropriate access to patient records. The message was clear: back off or lose your nursing license. So you kept quiet. I kept gathering evidence. I thought maybe if I had enough, someone would have to listen. Grace's voice broke. And then Willow disappeared, and I realized I'd waited too long. You're here now, Ember said, taking her aunt's hand. Knox was scanning files. The evidence was damning but incomplete. Medical records proved assault, but they didn't prove Drake was responsible. It was all victim testimony. "This is good," he said, "but it's not enough for criminal charges. We need more. Direct evidence connecting Drake to these crimes, financial records, communications, something that proves conspiracy." "There's something else," Grace said. "The girls who disappeared, including Willow, they all had one thing in common. They all had family members who owed money to Wellington Financial." That stopped Knox cold. "What?" I cross-referenced the missing persons with the hospital's billing records. Every single family had medical debt, and every single debt had been sold to Wellington Financial within 6 months of the disappearance. Grace pulled out handwritten notes. "It's not random. It's a pattern. The Wellingtons target families already in debt, already vulnerable." Knox's mind was racing. It was bigger than he'd thought. Not just assault. This was systematic. The Wellingtons were using their financial company as a hunting ground, identifying victims, tracking their families. "Human trafficking," he said quietly. Grace and Ember stared at him. "It's the only thing that makes sense," Knox continued. 11 girls disappear. No bodies. Families are too scared to push for investigations. The Wellingtons already have leverage through debt. They take the girls and the families can't fight back. "But where?" Ember's voice was desperate. Knox thought about the patterns, the logistics. Blackwater Cove was a port town. Shipping containers moved through here every day, heading to Canada, Russia, Asia. A trafficking operation would need transportation, secure locations, and protection from law enforcement. They had all of that. Sheriff Haynes provided protection. Wellington Financial provided the hunting ground. The port provided transportation. "We need help," Knox said. He pulled out his phone. "I know an FBI agent who specializes in trafficking cases." "The FBI won't help," Grace interrupted. "They've been called before every time Sheriff Haynes convinces them it's a local matter." "Reese is different," Knox said. "She doesn't care about politics." He dialed. The phone rang 4 times. "Callahan." "Reese, it's Knox Ashford." Silence. Then, "Knox, Jesus. I heard about Celeste. I'm so sorry." "I need your help." "Of course. Anything." Knox spent 10 minutes laying out everything: the missing girls, the pattern, the Wellington connection, the evidence Grace had gathered. Reese listened without interrupting. When he finished, there was a long pause, then, "I'm in Seattle. If I leave now, I can be in Blackwater Cove by morning. There's a storm. Roads might be closed. Then I'll find another way. Knox, if what you're describing is real, this could be bigger than one town. Wellington Financial operates in 6 states. If they're doing this in Alaska, they might be doing it everywhere." "That's what I'm afraid of. I'll need you to send me everything you have. And Knox, be careful. If the local sheriff is involved, you're fighting the system. That makes you a target." "I know." "Good. I'll call when I'm close." Knox hung up and looked at Ember and Grace. "We have 8 hours until the FBI gets here. In that time, we need to get you somewhere safe, because once I start making moves, the Wellingtons are going to come after anyone connected to me." "I'm not hiding," Ember said. "Your mother needs you alive. Your sister needs you alive." Knox's voice was firm. "This isn't negotiable." "Where would we go?" Knox pulled out a piece of paper, wrote an address. "This is a cabin 40 miles north. It belonged to a friend who died in Afghanistan. No one knows about it. There's a generator, canned food, firewood." "What are you going to do?" Grace asked. Knox looked down at Havoc, who gazed back with amber eyes that had seen war and never flinched. The dog's tail wagged once. "Ready." "I'm going to find those girls," Knox said. "And I'm going to make the Wellingtons wish they'd never heard my name." Outside, the storm howled. Snow piled against the warehouse walls. Temperature had dropped to -15. It was the kind of night when smart people stayed inside. Knox Ashford had spent 14 years in the Navy SEALs. He'd operated in conditions that would kill most men. He'd learned to use weather and darkness as weapons. And tonight he would teach the Wellingtons that storms didn't just destroy houses. Sometimes they brought justice. The attack came at 1 in the morning, 18 hours after Knox had confronted Drake Wellington in the diner. Knox was awake the way he'd been most nights since Celeste died. He'd spent the evening studying schematics of the Wellington building that Vince Lockhart had provided, memorizing layouts, planning entry routes. The work kept grief channeled into something productive. Havoc lifted his head 30 seconds before Knox heard anything. The dog's ears swiveled forward, tracking something in the night. Then came the growl, low and continuous. Knox was already moving. He killed the light, plunging the warehouse into darkness. His hand found the Glock at his back, chambered around. Through the gap in the boarded windows, he could see movement in the snow. 6 shapes spreading out in a coordinated pattern. They weren't trying to be quiet. Professional operators moved in slants. These men talked, laughed, stomped through snow. Hired muscle. Expensive enough to have decent equipment, cheap enough to be expendable. Knox responded the way 14 years in the teams had trained him. Fast, brutal, efficient. The first man through the side door never saw Knox. One moment he was stepping into what he thought was an empty building. The next moment Knox's arm was around his throat, applying pressure to the carotid arteries. The man struggled for maybe 3 seconds before going limp. Knox lowered him silently, took his rifle. Amateur hour. The second man made the mistake of calling out. "Davis!" Knox shot him through the doorway. 1 round center mass. The man went down hard. His partner spun toward the sound and Knox shot him too. The man fell backward into snow, already turning red. That left 3 outside. Knox moved to the window, used the rifle's optic to scan. The remaining attackers had taken cover behind a dumpster and van. Knox could have picked them off, but bodies brought questions. He needed the Wellingtons scared and reactive, not hiding behind lawyers. He fired 3 rounds over their heads. The attackers broke, ran for a black SUV piling in with desperate energy. The engine roared. Then they were gone. Knox waited 5 minutes. Then he moved to check the bodies. 2 dead, 1 unconscious. The dead men wore civilian clothes, carried no identification. Their weapons were clean, untraceable. The unconscious one was different. Knox found a wallet. Marcus Webb. But tucked behind the license was a business card for Titan Security Services. Knox photographed everything, then zip-tied Webb's hands and dragged him to the corner. The man would wake in an hour with questions he couldn't answer. He called Ember. She answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" "Still at my house. Aunt Grace went to get her car. We're packing. 6 men just tried to kill me. They'll come after anyone connected to me. You need to leave. Right now. Don't pack. Just grab your mother and go." "The cabin." "No, they might have been watching. Go to Blackwater Medical Center. Park in the emergency lot where there are cameras. Stay in public until Grace gets there." "What about you?" "I'll be fine. Havoc and I know how to disappear." He hung up. Havoc was already at the door, ready to move. Knox grabbed his go-bag, laptop, hard drives, cash, ammunition. 40 pounds. He'd carried worse. They left through the back, melting into darkness and snow. Knox knew these streets, had mapped every alley during 3 weeks of surveillance. He moved through Blackwater Cove like a ghost. 30 minutes later, they were in the truck driving north on a service road that wouldn't show up on GPS. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "You were warned." Knox deleted it and kept driving. Dawn came slowly. The sky went from black to deep blue to gray, and the storm began to ease. Knox pulled off into a stand of trees, killed the engine, and waited. Drake Wellington would be furious. 6 men sent, and they'd come back with 2 dead and 1 captured. Drake would want immediate retaliation. That was good. Angry people made mistakes. Knox's phone rang. Agent Reese Callahan. "I'm 3 hours out," Reese said. "Roads are a mess, but passable. I'm bringing a team. But Knox, I need you to understand something. I can't arrest people without evidence that meets federal standards. What you've sent is enough to open an investigation, but not enough for warrants. I need more. What kind of more? Direct evidence connecting the Wellingtons to the disappearances. Financial records showing payments related to trafficking. Something that proves conspiracy. Knox thought about the USB drive Grace had given him. What if I could give you proof that the missing girls were targeted specifically because their families owed money to Wellington Financial? That would help, but I'd need documentation, bank records, loan files, correspondence. I can get it. How? Knox looked at the warehouse district in the distance. Better if you don't know. Reese was quiet. Knox, if you're thinking about breaking into their offices, that's a felony. Anything you find would be inadmissible. Only if they know how you got it. What if an employee leaked the files anonymously? That's a hell of a risk. It's the only play we have. The Wellingtons own the local law. If we wait for warrants, evidence will disappear. We have maybe 24 hours. Another pause. I can't officially condone this, but I also can't stop you. Just understand that if you get caught, I can't protect you. I know. And Knox, those missing girls, if they're still alive, they're running out of time. Trafficking operations don't keep victims in one place long. Knox thought about Willow Hartley, 16 years old, missing for 2 months. I'll call you when I have something. He hung up and pulled out Vince's schematics. The Wellington building blueprints were detailed, showing security cameras, motion sensors, badge access points. There was a weak spot, a service entrance on the north side. At 8:45, Vince called. System's ready. I can give you 30 minutes starting at 9 o'clock. After that, the morning shift supervisor will notice the loop. Understood. Knox started the truck. The drive took 15 minutes through empty streets. The Wellington building was 10 stories of glass and steel, ostentatious for Blackwater Cove. The parking lot held maybe 20 cars. Knox parked 3 blocks away. He and Havoc walked the rest of the way using alleys, staying out of sight. The north entrance was exactly where the schematics showed it, a metal door marked maintenance only. Knox pulled a programmable RFID card from his pocket. It took 30 seconds to cycle through access codes before the lock clicked open. They were in. The maintenance corridor was narrow, lit by flickering fluorescents. Knox moved fast, Havoc keeping pace until they reached the elevator shaft. Knox hotwired the control board, overrode safety protocols, and sent the elevator to the 15th floor. They rode up in darkness. When the elevator stopped, Knox forced the doors open and stepped into the executive suite of Wellington Financial. Expensive furniture, original art, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the bay. Victor Wellington's desk was the size of a small car. Behind it was a wall of filing cabinets and a computer workstation. Knox sat down, pulled out a USB drive with custom software designed to crack passwords. Military-grade, acquired from a former teammate. While the software worked, Knox searched the physical files. The filing cabinets were organized by year and client name. He started with the current year, looking for loans to families of missing girls. Found one within minutes, Robert and Helen Hartley. Loan amount $50,000 for medical expenses. Interest rate started at 12%, jumped to 23% after 6 months. Knox photographed every page, then moved to the next cabinet. Found another family with a missing daughter, then another. By the time he'd worked through 4 cabinets, he'd documented loans to 7 of the 11 missing girls' families. The pattern was undeniable. The computer beeped. Password cracked. Knox accessed the financial database, searching for payment records. Found a folder labeled Special Projects with encrypted subfolders. Military or government-level encryption. That meant whatever was in those files was worth protecting. Knox plugged in a second USB drive with decryption software. He couldn't wait for it to finish, but he could take the files and decrypt them later. While the files copied, Knox searched Victor's desk, found a locked drawer, picked the lock. Inside was a leather-bound ledger. Knox opened it. What he saw made his blood run cold. The ledger contained names, dates, and amounts. But these weren't loans. These were transactions, sales. The names were the missing girls. The dates corresponded to when they'd disappeared. Amounts ranged from $20,000 to $50,000. Next to each name was a destination: Vancouver, Vladivostok, Shanghai, Manila. The girls were being sold, trafficked. Willow Hartley's name was there. 16 years old. Disappeared December 18th. Sale amount $30,000. Destination Vancouver, status pending transport, pending. That meant she was still here, still alive. Knox photographed every page, his hands steady even as rage built behind his ribs. 14 years in the teams had taught him to control emotion, to channel anger into focus. His phone buzzed. Text from Vince. 25 minutes down. Security supervisor noticed the loop. You need to leave now. Knox closed the ledger, made sure everything looked undisturbed. The USB drive was still copying files, 70% complete. He needed those files. Footsteps in the hallway, multiple people. Knox's hand moved to the Glock. Havoc growled, positioning himself between Knox and the door. The door opened. 3 security guards, all armed, all with weapons drawn. They froze when they saw Knox. Then they saw Havoc. "Don't move," the guard said. His voice shook. "Police are on the way." Knox calculated odds. 3 armed men 15 feet away. He could drop all 3, but gunfire would bring more security, would give the Wellingtons the excuse they needed. The USB drive beeped. Copy complete. Knox pulled it from the computer, slipped it into his pocket. "I'm leaving," Knox said. His voice was calm. "No one needs to get hurt." "You're not leaving." Knox looked at the guards, saw the fear. They were paid to watch cameras, not to confront someone trained to kill efficiently. Havoc's growl intensified, a sound that made something primal in the human brain scream warnings. "Last chance," Knox said quietly. "Step aside." The lead guard's hand trembled. The gun wavered. He was maybe 25, probably had a family. He stepped aside. Knox walked past them, Havoc at his heel. The guards didn't follow. Knox took the stairs, descending 15 floors in less than 3 minutes. Havoc bounded ahead, scouting each landing. They exited through a fire door on the ground floor, setting off an alarm. By the time security figured out which exit, Knox and Havoc were 3 blocks away, climbing into the truck, pulling out just as police sirens wailed. Knox drove north onto back roads. His phone buzzed continuously with unknown numbers. He ignored them all except Reese Callahan. "Tell me you got something," she said. "I got everything. Financial records showing loans to victims' families, a ledger documenting sales of human beings, destinations and amounts, proof of trafficking spanning multiple countries." "How did you get this?" "Anonymous source. Someone inside Wellington Financial with a conscience." "Knox, can you use it or not?" Reese was quiet. "If I can verify it's authentic, yes. This would give me jurisdiction and probable cause, but I need to see it. I'll send you digital copies in the next hour, encrypted. And the originals. I'm keeping those safe until this is over." "Okay. I'm 30 minutes from Blackwater Cove. I'll get a warrant request to a federal judge the second I verify these files. But Knox, once I start making arrests, the Wellingtons will know their operation is compromised. If those girls are still here, they'll try to move them immediately. We need to locate them before that happens." "I know where they are." "What?" "The ledger. It had a location: Dock 7 Container Alpha 7. That's a shipping container at the commercial port. That's where they're keeping the girls." Reese swore. "How long ago did you see this?" 20 minutes. "Then we're already on borrowed time. If they realize someone accessed that ledger, they'll move those girls right now." Knox looked at his watch. 9:45. The port was 20 minutes away. Reese was 30 minutes out, plus time to assemble her team. The math was simple and brutal. The girls would be gone before the FBI arrived, unless someone got there first. "I'm going to the port," Knox said. "Knox, no. Wait for us. This needs to be done by the book. Those girls don't have time for the book. If you go in alone, you could be killed, or you could contaminate the crime scene, or I could save 11 lives." Knox's voice was flat. "I didn't survive 3 tours in Afghanistan to play it safe now." He hung up. She'd understand. She knew that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing weren't the same thing. Knox chose the girls. The port was a sprawl of cranes and containers of organized chaos. Security was minimal, just a guard shack and hourly patrols. Knox bypassed the main entrance, cutting through a section of poorly repaired chain-link fence. Havoc went first, then disappeared into shadows between containers. Knox followed, using the massive steel boxes as cover, working toward Dock 7. He found it within minutes. Container Alpha 7 sat on a flatbed trailer ready to be loaded. There were no obvious guards, but Knox's instincts screamed warning. Then he saw them. 4 men in tactical gear carrying rifles, positioned at corners with overlapping fields of fire. Professional security. Knox counted options: 4 armed opponents in defensive positions, no cover between his current location and the container. Even Havoc couldn't take down 4 men with rifles. He needed a distraction. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "You're at the port. I know because I'm watching you. Last chance, Ashford. Walk away." Knox looked around, spotted security cameras. The Wellingtons had access to those feeds. Another text. "You can't win this. You're outnumbered, outgunned. Those guards have orders to shoot on sight." Knox typed, "Then you better send more guards." He pulled out his lighter and a rag from his truck's emergency kit, soaked the rag in gasoline, set it on fire, and threw it into a pile of wooden pallets 30 yards from the container. The pallets caught immediately. Alarms started blaring. 2 guards ran toward the fire with extinguishers, leaving 2 at the container. Better odds. Then Havoc moved. The dog circled wide, staying low. Knox lost sight of him. Then 1 guard shouted, spun around, fired 3 shots. Havoc appeared from a different direction, launching himself at the second guard, 73 pounds of muscle and teeth hitting the man high. The man screamed. Knox was already running his Glock up and tracking the first guard, who'd turned back. Knox fired twice. Both shots hit center mass. The guard went down. The 2 guards from the fire were running back, raising rifles. Knox dove behind a forklift as bullets sparked off metal. Havoc had the second guard on the ground, jaws locked on the man's arm. Knox rolled out, fired 3 more rounds. One of the running guards collapsed. The last guard took cover, returning fire in controlled bursts. Professional, disciplined, dangerous. Knox circled wide, using containers as concealment. The guard kept changing positions. This could go on for hours. Knox needed to end it now. He pulled a flashbang from his go bag, pulled the pin, and threw it over the container. The grenade detonated with a bang that rattled steel and a flash that lit up the port. The guard stumbled out, temporarily blinded. Knox shot him 3 times. The man fell. Havoc released the second guard, who was clutching his mangled arm. Knox zip-tied his hands, then moved to the container. The door was secured with a heavy padlock. Knox shot the lock off. The door swung open. Inside were 11 young women. They huddled in darkness, filthy, terrified, some barely conscious. The smell was overwhelming. "I'm here to help," he said, keeping his voice calm. "My name is Knox. FBI is on the way. You're safe now." One of the girls looked up. Young, maybe 16, with dark hair. "Are you real?" Her voice was a whisper. "You're not dead. You're going home." Knox stepped into the container, started checking for injuries. Most were dehydrated, malnourished, showing signs of abuse. 3 had obvious infections. "Willow Hartley?" Knox asked. "Is Willow here?" The dark-haired girl raised her hand weakly. "That's me." Knox felt something loosen in his chest. "Your sister sent me. Ember. She's safe. She's waiting for you." Willow started crying. Not quiet tears, but body-shaking sobs of someone who'd given up hope and just got it back. Sirens in the distance. Multiple vehicles. Knox looked out, saw flashing lights converging. Too many for just police. Federal vehicles mixed with local cruisers. Reese had arrived. Knox helped the girls out one by one. Havoc stood guard, but no more threats came. Just FBI agents and EMTs and the organized chaos of a major crime scene being secured. Reese found Knox standing next to the container. She looked at the girls, at the dead guards, at the evidence of years of trafficking. Her face was hard professional, but Knox saw the anger underneath. "You couldn't wait 30 minutes, she said. "They'd have been gone in 30 minutes. You killed 4 people. I saved 11. Reese studied him. "You know what happens next. Investigation reports, possible charges, even if ruled justified. The Wellingtons will claim you're a vigilante, claim nothing we found can be trusted. Let them claim whatever they want. Those girls are alive. That's what matters." Reese nodded slowly. Then she put a hand on his shoulder. "You did good work today, Knox. Stupid, illegal, dangerous work, but good." She walked away to coordinate with her team. Knox stood with Havoc in the snow. The dog leaned against his leg, exhausted but alert. EMTs were loading the girls into ambulances. Knox watched Willow being carried on a stretcher, an oxygen mask over her face, an IV already running. She'd live. They'd all live. His phone buzzed one last time. Text from Victor Wellington. "This isn't over." Knox looked at the message, then deleted it. Victor was right. It wasn't over. Not until every person involved was in prison. But Knox had time. He had patience. And most importantly, he had nothing left to lose. The storm had passed. The sky was clearing, showing patches of blue. In the distance, the ocean stretched endlessly. Knox turned away from the water and walked toward his truck. Havoc followed, limping slightly, but otherwise unharmed. They'd both survived worse. They'd survive whatever came next, because that's what SEALs did. They survived, they adapted, they overcame, and they never ever quit. The first 48 hours after the port raid were chaos measured in coffee cups and paperwork. Knox sat in a conference room at the FBI's temporary headquarters, a converted office building that smelled of new carpet and government staleness. Havoc lay under the table, eyes tracking every person who entered or left. Agent Reese Callahan had commandeered the entire 3rd floor, bringing in a team of 12 agents, documenting evidence, interviewing witnesses, building a case that would survive the Wellington family's lawyers. Knox had given his statement 4 times to 4 different people. The shootings at the port had been ruled justified. 4 dead security guards who'd been firing on a federal crime scene, protecting a container full of kidnapped women. The investigation was technically ongoing, but Reese had made it clear Knox wouldn't face charges. The Wellingtons were facing plenty, though. Victor Wellington had been arrested at his estate at dawn. Security footage showed him being led out in handcuffs, still wearing a silk bathrobe, his face a mask of outraged dignity. Drake Wellington had tried to run, made it as far as the marina. Coast Guard intercepted him 2 miles offshore. Sheriff Boone Haynes had been arrested at his home. Unlike Victor's theatrical departure, Haynes had gone quietly, almost with relief. He'd started talking within an hour, offering testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. The information he provided opened up the case, revealing layers of corruption deeper than anyone had suspected. 17 law enforcement officers across 3 states, 2 state senators, a federal customs inspector, all on the Wellington payroll, all helping facilitate a trafficking operation that had been running for 7 years. The girls had been transported to Anchorage Regional Hospital, where specialized teams were treating physical injuries and beginning the long process of psychological recovery. Willow Hartley was in stable condition, infection controlled by IV antibiotics, prognosis good. Ember had stayed by her sister's bedside for 36 hours straight, before Grace physically dragged her away to sleep. Knox had visited once, standing in the doorway watching Willow sleep. She looked impossibly young, fragile in a way that made Knox's chest hurt. Ember had been sitting next to the bed, and when she'd looked up and seen Knox, her eyes had filled with tears. "Thank you," she'd whispered. "Thank you for bringing her back." Knox hadn't known what to say. But standing there looking at those 2 sisters reunited, he'd felt something shift inside him. Not closure. Celeste was still gone, but maybe purpose. Maybe the beginning of understanding that life continued even after the worst things happened. Now, 2 days after the raid, Knox sat across from Reese in her makeshift office, reviewing evidence. The leather ledger from Victor's desk was spread open, its pages photographed and catalogued. The financial records Knox had stolen had been decrypted, revealing a network of shell companies and offshore accounts that stretched across 12 countries. "The scope is bigger than we thought," Reese said. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "Wellington Financial operated in 6 states. We're finding evidence of trafficking operations in all of them. Preliminary estimates suggest over 200 victims over 7 years." Knox absorbed that number. 200 lives stolen, families destroyed, futures erased. "How many have you found?" Knox asked. "So far, 27 survivors. We're working with international partners to locate others, but many are in countries with limited cooperation." "But you'll try." "We'll try." Reese met his eyes. "Because of what you did, Knox. Those 27 women are alive because of you." Knox looked down at Havoc. The dog gazed back with amber eyes that had seen the worst of humanity and still managed to trust. "I had help," Knox said quietly. "Speaking of which." Reese pulled out a folder. "Grace Hartley. The medical records she compiled, the evidence she gathered while risking her nursing license and possibly her life, that's what gave us the foundation for this case. I want to make sure she's protected. She broke HIPAA laws. She exposed a criminal conspiracy. There's a difference. I've spoken with the federal prosecutor. They're willing to grant her immunity in exchange for testimony, and I'm personally going to recommend her for a Civilian Service Award." Knox nodded. Grace deserved recognition. "What about Ember?" Knox asked. "And her mother? The loan from Wellington Financial has been forgiven. Actually, all loans from Wellington Financial are being reviewed. We're finding that most were predatory, deliberately structured to trap borrowers in escalating debt. The federal government is seizing all Wellington assets, including the loan portfolio. Families who were victimized will have their debts eliminated." Something loosened in Knox's chest. Celeste's debt was part of that portfolio, the $147,000 that had consumed their last months together. Gone. Erased. Too late to save her, but at least her memory wouldn't be attached to that burden. "There's something else," Reese continued. She pulled out another document stamped with official seals. "Celeste's death. Sheriff Haynes confessed to sabotaging her vehicle. Said Victor Wellington ordered it after Celeste contacted the FBI about the trafficking operation. She'd filed a complaint, started an investigation. The FBI regional office dropped it due to lack of evidence, but Victor didn't want to take chances." Knox went very still. He'd suspected, had known on some level that Celeste's accident had been too convenient. But hearing it confirmed made it real. "He killed her," Knox said. His voice came out flat. "Yes, and he'll be charged with murder, 1st degree, along with conspiracy to commit human trafficking, racketeering, money laundering, and about 40 other federal crimes. He's looking at life in prison, so is Drake. That's not enough. I know, but it's what we have. Justice isn't always satisfying, Knox." Knox looked at the photographs spread across the table. 11 girls from the container, 16 others found in locations across Alaska and Canada, statements from dozens of witnesses, financial records documenting years of criminal enterprise, and it still felt like not enough. "What do you need from me?" Knox asked. "Testimony. You'll be a key witness at trial. The defense will try to discredit you, paint you as a vigilante. You need to be prepared for that. I can handle lawyers. I know you can. But Knox, there's something else." Reese leaned forward. "What happens after this, after the trials and convictions? You've been living on rage and purpose for 8 months. What happens when that's gone?" Knox didn't have an answer. He'd been so focused on bringing down the Wellingtons that he hadn't thought beyond it. "I don't know," he admitted. "You should think about it, because I've seen what happens to men like you when the mission ends. Sometimes they find new purpose, sometimes they drift, and sometimes they just stop." Knox met her eyes, saw genuine concern. "I'll figure it out." "I hope so." Reese stood, gathered her files. "We're done here for today. Go get some rest, actual rest in a bed." Knox almost smiled. "I'll try." He left with Havoc, walked out into afternoon sunlight that felt strange after days in artificial light. The storm had passed completely, leaving clear skies and temperatures that had climbed to 20 degrees. His truck was where he'd left it, covered in frozen snow. Knox spent 10 minutes scraping windows. Havoc jumped into the passenger seat, settled in with patience. Knox drove without destination, just following roads away from town. He ended up at Mitchell Point, the land Celeste's family had owned for 3 generations. The house was still there, a weathered structure that needed work but had good bones. He parked and got out. Havoc followed, immediately beginning a perimeter check. Knox walked to the edge of the point where land dropped away to rocks and ocean. The view was spectacular. Mountains in the distance, water stretching to the horizon, sky so big it made you understand how small you were. Celeste had loved this place, had talked about it constantly in those last months about the house. She'd never get to renovate the garden, she'd never plant the life they'd never build together. He stood there for a long time, listening to wind and waves. Havoc returned and sat next to Knox's leg, a solid presence. "I did what I set out to do," Knox said, to the ocean, to the sky, to his dead wife who couldn't hear him but maybe somewhere could. "I brought them down. They're going to prison. They're going to pay for what they did to you, to those girls." The wind picked up, carrying salt spray and the cry of gulls. "But I don't know what to do now. I don't know how to be alive when you're not." Knox's voice cracked. "Everything I did for the last 8 months, it was for you. And now that's done, and I'm still here, and you're still gone, and I don't know what the point is." Havoc leaned against his leg. They'd been through war together. The dog had lost handlers before Knox had grieved and moved on and bonded again, because that's what military working dogs did. They adapted. They persevered. They found new purpose. Maybe Knox could learn from that. His phone buzzed. Text from Ember. "Willow's awake and asking for you. She wants to say thank you in person." Knox looked at the message for a long moment. He could ignore it, could stay here communing with ghosts. Or he could go back, could accept that life continued and people needed things. He chose to go back. The hospital was busy with shift changes. Knox navigated to Willow's room with Havoc at his heel. Willow was sitting up in bed, looking better but still fragile. Ember sat next to her and Grace stood by the window. All 3 women looked up when Knox entered. "Mr. Ashford," Willow said. Her voice was stronger now. "Ember told me what you did, how you found me, how you got us out." "I'm glad you're safe," Knox said simply. "The FBI said there were 11 of us, that we were going to be sold, that if you hadn't come when you did, we'd be in another country by now and no one would ever find us." Knox nodded. It was true. Another few hours and the girls would have been loaded onto a ship, transported across borders, lost in systems designed to hide people. "Why did you help us?" Willow asked. "You didn't know me. You could have just walked away." Knox looked at this young woman who'd survived hell and come out asking questions. "Your sister asked me the same thing 2 days ago," he said. "The answer hasn't changed. Someone should have helped my wife when she needed it. I wasn't going to let that happen to anyone else." Willow's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry about your wife." "Me too." Knox looked at Ember, at Grace, at this family that had been shattered and was now tentatively reassembling itself. "But you're going home. That matters." "What about you?" Ember asked quietly. "I don't know yet. Figure it out as I go." Grace spoke up from the window. "I've been thinking about something. The Wellington operation targeted vulnerable families. People with medical debt, people who were desperate. Those families are going to need help recovering, counseling and support." Knox wasn't sure where she was going with this. "You have experience with trauma, military experience. And you have Havoc, who's a trained service dog. There are programs that pair veterans with service dogs, programs that help people heal." Grace stepped closer. "What if you started something like that here, a foundation that helps trafficking survivors, that provides service dogs and training and support?" Knox stared at her, started to say it was impossible, that he didn't know anything about running a non-profit. But then he thought about Celeste, who'd been a nurse because she'd wanted to help people. Thought about what she would say if she could tell him what to do with the rest of his life. She'd tell him to help people. "I don't have money for something like that," Knox said. "The federal government is seizing Wellington assets," Grace said. "Millions of dollars. I've been talking with Agent Callahan. She says there are programs that direct seized assets to victim services. She could help you apply for grants." "Why would you want me to do this?" Knox asked. "Because you did something no one else would do. You stood up when everyone else sat down." Grace's voice was fierce now. "The world needs more people like you. And those girls, the survivors, they need someone who understands. Someone who won't give up on them." Knox looked down at Havoc. The dog gazed back, tail wagging slightly. 14 years together, and the dog was still ready for whatever came next. Maybe Knox could do the same. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Talk to Agent Callahan, see what's possible." "That's all I'm asking," Grace said. Knox left feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the distant cousin of hope. The next week passed in a blur of meetings and paperwork. Turns out that starting a nonprofit was complicated, required lawyers and accountants. But Reese knew people, and she made calls, used her position to open doors. The Celeste Ashford Memorial Foundation was officially established on a Tuesday morning in February. Knox signed papers, accepted advice from lawyers who donated their time, listened to Reese explain how grant funding worked. The foundation's mission was simple: provide service dogs to trafficking survivors and their families, offer training and support, help people rebuild through the human-animal bond. Knox would run the program using Mitchell Point as headquarters. The house needed work, but there was space for kennels and training areas. Funding came from the Wellington Asset Seizure, a federal grant of $500,000 designated for victim services. Enough to get started to build basic infrastructure to acquire dogs and begin training them. Knox threw himself into the project with the same intensity he'd once brought to hunting the Wellingtons. He worked 18-hour days renovating the house, building kennels, studying canine behavior. Havoc supervised everything, limping around with the air of a retired general, making sure the new recruits were up to standard. Volunteers appeared. Grace offered her medical expertise. Ember, once Willow was released, started helping with administrative work. Vince Lockhart showed up one day with blueprints for a new kennel design and tools to start building. 6 weeks after the raid, the foundation received its first service dog candidate. A 2-year-old German Shepherd named Ranger, rescued from a shelter, nervous but with good instincts. Knox spent hours with Ranger, teaching basic obedience, building trust, gradually introducing the skills a service dog needed. Havoc helped train Ranger, demonstrating behaviors with patience. Knox watched the two dogs work together and felt something shift. This was right. This was what he was supposed to be doing. The first handler paired with a dog was a young woman named Lisa, 23, who'd been trafficked for 2 years. She was skittish, prone to panic attacks. But when she met Ranger, something changed. The dog sensed her anxiety, moved close to provide comfort, and Lisa's rigid posture relaxed. "Can I pet him?" she asked. "He'd like that," Knox said. Lisa reached out slowly, let Ranger sniff her hand, then scratched behind his ears. The dog leaned into the touch, and Lisa smiled. It was a small smile, tentative, but it was real. Over the next 3 months, Lisa and Ranger trained together. Knox taught Lisa how to read the dog's signals, how to give commands, how to trust. He watched Lisa transform gradually from a terrified survivor into someone who could walk through a grocery store without hyperventilating, who could sleep through the night because Ranger was there. By spring, the foundation had 6 dogs and 6 handlers. By summer, 12. Word spread through the survivor community. People started calling, asking if the program could help. Knox said yes every time. Built more kennels, took on more volunteers, applied for more grants. The work was exhausting, sometimes heartbreaking when handlers struggled. But it was also rewarding in a way nothing else had been since Celeste died. He was helping people, making a difference. The trial started in September. Victor Wellington faced federal charges in Seattle. Knox testified for 3 days. Defense lawyers tried to paint him as a vigilante, a man consumed by grief who'd manufactured evidence. Reese's prosecutors systematically destroyed that narrative. They presented the ledger from Victor's desk. The financial records documenting years of trafficking testimony from Sheriff Haynes and other co-conspirators. They brought in survivors, including Willow, who told their stories in voices that shook but never broke. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Victor Wellington was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole plus an additional 60 years. Drake Wellington's trial was shorter. His lawyers tried to argue diminished capacity, claimed he'd been under his father's influence. The prosecution presented evidence of Drake's enthusiastic participation, his personal selection of victims, his direct involvement in kidnapping and assault. The jury took 2 hours, guilty, 30 years federal prison. Sheriff Boone Haynes received 25 years in exchange for his cooperation. 17 other law enforcement officers received sentences ranging from 8 to 20 years. Agent Reese Callahan's work on the Wellington case earned her a promotion to Assistant Director of the FBI's Human Trafficking Division. 6 months after the final conviction, she established a national task force using the Wellington investigation as a blueprint. The task force coordinated efforts across 56 field offices, trained agents in recognizing trafficking patterns, created protocols for protecting survivors. She called Knox when the task force was officially launched. "None of this would exist without what you started," she told him. "The foundation, the model for pairing survivors with service dogs, the emphasis on treating victims as people instead of evidence. We're incorporating all of it into federal guidelines." "That's good," Knox said. "It already is. We've opened 43 new investigations in 6 months, rescued over 100 victims. Your wife would be proud." Knox didn't respond immediately. Then quietly, "Thank you for that." They stayed in touch after that, Reese calling every few months to update Knox on progress, to ask advice, to share victories and setbacks. She became not quite a friend, but something close, someone who understood what the work cost. Knox attended every day of the trials, sat in the gallery and watched justice unfold with the slow inevitability of a glacier. It wasn't satisfying in the way revenge fantasies promised. It was bureaucratic and tedious, but it was real. It was the system working the way it was supposed to work. On the day of Victor's sentencing, Knox stood outside the courthouse with Reese. They didn't say much, just stood there in autumn sunlight. "You okay?" Reese asked eventually. Knox thought about it. Celeste was still gone. That pain hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape, become something he could carry without being crushed. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." "Good, because I have something to tell you." Reese pulled out her phone. "Final count from the investigation. We identified 247 victims total across 7 years. 89 survivors have been located and repatriated. 7 more were just found in Vancouver. We're still searching for others, but many are in countries where cooperation is limited." Knox did the math silently. 247 identified victims, 89 found alive. That meant 158 were either dead or lost in systems designed to make people disappear. "The 89 who made it," Knox said. "What happens to them now? Medical treatment, trauma counseling, reintegration services. And several have already contacted your foundation. Word's spreading about what you're doing." Knox didn't know what to say. He'd done what needed doing. But hearing that lives were still being saved, that the foundation was still spreading outward, that meant something. "Thank you," he said finally. They shook hands and Reese left. Knox stood there for a while longer, then walked to where he'd parked. Havoc was waiting in the passenger seat, gray around the muzzle now, but still alert. "What do you say, boy?" Knox asked as he climbed in. "Ready to go home?" Havoc's tail wagged. Home. The word felt strange, unfamiliar after months of thinking of himself as temporary. But Mitchell Point was home now. The foundation was home. The work was home. He drove north back to Alaska. The drive took 2 days through wilderness that hadn't changed in 10,000 years. Knox arrived at Mitchell Point on a Friday evening. The house looked different than it had 8 months ago. The roof had been repaired, the windows replaced. Inside, the rooms that had been empty now held furniture and warmth and purpose. Kennels out back housed 15 dogs. A staff of 6 volunteers kept everything running. Ember met him at the door. "Welcome back. How'd it go?" "Victor got life. Drake got 30 years. It's over." "Good." Ember stepped aside. "Willow wanted me to tell you she's starting college next month. Criminal justice major. Says she wants to work for the FBI someday." Knox smiled. That sounded exactly like Willow. "How's your mom?" "Good. Blood sugar's stable. She's talking about volunteering here." "That'd be great." Ember studied him. "You look different. Lighter somehow." "Yeah, maybe I am." That night, Knox stood on the bluff overlooking the ocean, the same place he'd stood months ago when he'd been lost and angry. The view was the same, but Knox was different. He'd found purpose again, found a way to honor Celeste's memory that focused on the thing she'd valued most, helping people. Havoc stood beside him, leaning against his leg. The dog was 12 years old now, well past retirement age, living on borrowed time. But he was here solid and warm, and Knox was grateful for every extra day. "I miss her," Knox said to the ocean. "Every day I miss her. But I'm doing okay. Building something that matters. I think she'd be proud." The wind picked up, carrying salt spray and the cry of gulls. Knox stood there until the sun set and stars appeared, until cold became uncomfortable. Then they walked back to the house together, to warmth and light, and the sound of dogs barking and people talking and life continuing in all its messy, complicated persistence. 2 years after the raid, the Celeste Ashford Memorial Foundation had trained 47 service dogs and paired them with trafficking survivors across 6 states. Knox ran the program with the same intensity he'd once brought to being a SEAL. He was 40 years old, grayer than he'd been at 38, marked by scars both visible and not. But he was alive. He was helping people. And he'd found a way to keep moving forward. Havoc died on a Wednesday morning in March, peacefully in his sleep. He was 14 years old, ancient for a German shepherd. Knox buried him on the bluff overlooking the ocean, in a spot where Celeste would have appreciated the view. He didn't cry, didn't break down, just stood there with Ember and Grace and Willow and 24 volunteers and survivors who'd come to pay respects to a dog who'd saved more lives than most people. "He was a good dog," Willow said quietly. "The best," Knox agreed. He planted a tree over Havoc's grave, a spruce that would grow tall and strong. Havoc had been a protector in life. Now he'd protect this place in death. The foundation continued. New dogs arrived, were trained, paired with handlers. Knox kept working, kept building, kept finding ways to help survivors rebuild. It wasn't dramatic work. It was quiet, patient progress measured in small victories and lives slowly rebuilt. But it mattered. It mattered to the young woman who could finally sleep. It mattered to the family that didn't lose their house. It mattered to the survivors who found community and support. 5 years after Celeste's death, Knox stood on the bluff at sunset. The foundation had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. 89 dogs trained, 32 handlers working as advocates, partnerships with law enforcement across the country, a model being replicated in other states. Knox thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the worst day of his life to this moment, doing work that honored her memory. It hadn't been linear. It hadn't been easy. There'd been days when he'd wanted to quit, but he'd kept going, one day at a time, one dog at a time, one survivor at a time. And now, looking out at the ocean, Knox understood something he hadn't before. Recovery wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding a way to carry loss without being destroyed by it. It was about transforming pain into purpose. Celeste would have understood that. She'd spent her life doing exactly that. A car pulled up. Ember got out, followed by Willow, home from college for spring break. They walked up to where Knox stood. "We got the email from Agent Callahan," Ember said. 3 more survivors found in Manila. They're being brought home, and they're asking if the foundation can help. "We can help," Knox said. "We always help." Willow smiled. She was 21 now, confident in a way she hadn't been at 16. That's what makes this place special. You never say no. You never give up on people. Someone didn't give up on me when they should have, Knox said. Seems only fair to pass that on. They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon, as darkness crept in, as stars began appearing one by one. Three people who'd been broken in different ways, who'd found each other in the wreckage, who'd built something that mattered. Knox thought about Celeste one last time. Not with the sharp pain of early grief, but with the bittersweet ache of love that persisted beyond death. We did it, he whispered to the wind. We made something good from something terrible. We helped people. We kept your promise. The wind answered with the cry of gulls and the sound of waves. It wasn't the response Knox wanted, but it was the response he had, and after 5 years of learning to accept what couldn't be changed, that was enough. He turned away from the ocean and walked back to the house, back to the work that waited, back to the life he'd built from the ruins of the old one. Behind him, the sun finished setting, painting the sky in colors that would fade but return again tomorrow. Knox Ashford had learned that lesson the hard way, but he'd learned it. And now he spent his days teaching it to others, showing survivors that life continued, that rebuilding was possible, that there was still beauty and purpose even after the worst things happened. It was good work, important work, the kind of work worth getting up for every morning, the kind of work worth living for. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. A reason to keep going, a purpose that mattered. And the knowledge that even in darkness, even in grief, the human spirit could still find ways to rebuild, to grow, to help others carry their burdens. Knox had found his way, and now he spent his days helping others find theirs. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.